All right. How about now? Same link. Cool. Glad we got that sorted out. What is a variable and how do we declare one? Var? But what is var? It holds a value, yes. It holds a lot of values. It can hold pretty much any object that JavaScript can create. That would be actually, what are the different objects that you can have within JavaScript?
Or you can have a string.
Correct, you have a string.
You can put a number.
Sure.
Or you can put a boolean.
Those are definitely the three primitive ones. And then you could also assign like your own custom objects in general in JavaScript. So certain objects would be like a dictionary. You guys might have seen this, and then an array, which would be that. Those are all JavaScript objects that you can assign to a variable, like so. What does it mean to console log? Say what?
Check your work.
Granted, you're checking your work, but what are you actually doing when you type in console log into your console? Yes, it's kind of like you're printing out those values. Quick example of that would be, let's always go to the browser, open up my console. Your Google developer tool should be your best friend when in doubt. So we'll just create a variable x equals, I don't know, blah. If we do console.log and x, we expect it to print out the value of x. That's what it does. I think there's another one called alert, so we could do like alert, I don't know, blah again. What does that do? What do you think is going to happen when I do alert blah? This is just a recap. You guys have seen this all before.
You get a pop-up that says blah.
Exactly. You get a pop-up that says blah. Now, how about if I switch that and did prompt?
Yes or no? Or okay or cancel.
Let's see. Yes, you get an OK, cancel, and a text box. So these are all things you guys have already seen, but just want to do a quick recap on what they were. Let's see. Let's keep it going. Oh, all right. So how do you write text into HTML itself? So let's say you have a page, and through JavaScript, you want to be able to write a certain value on the screen. How would you do so? Document.write. And that would look like so. Within your JavaScript script tags, you would type in your JavaScript to do what it is that you want it to do. So let's actually, we don't need to see that in action. That's just basic. These are the if conditionals. So within an if conditional, it takes a Boolean value. So if true, it'll enter this scoped block and then do the alerts. Else, if that is not true, it'll try this next line. If that's true, we'll do the alerts. Else, if that's false, we'll hop into the final case, which is else. Else does no check because it's kind of like if the other two fail, do whatever is inside this block right here, which is document writing. Any questions on if-else conditionals? All right. And what is an array? An array is pretty much a collection of objects. You can take strings, as you mentioned earlier, integers, Boolean values, special dictionaries, other arrays. You can take anything. What a collection does is pretty much holds data for you. So you can almost think of an array like your mini database, so to speak. It holds the values that you'll now use later on in your code. To access an array, you begin. Oh, I'm right on this, so let me not do anything. You access these values by index numbers, and the index numbers begin at 0. Don't ask me why they just opted to start at 0. It was to start out with some comp sci guy back in the day. So you would take the very first value, so that would be Nick characters, access variable 0, that would be Tommy, variable 1 would be Doug, variable 2 would be Buena. All right. So just want to show y'all an example of that really quick. Have you guys seen arrays before, or is today the very first day?
We saw them last week.
Last week?
I'm sorry, in the last lesson.
Last lesson? All right, cool. So maybe I won't do a demo then. What I would like you guys to do is grab the activity number 14 and discuss amongst yourselves what you think is going on inside this file. Yeah, let us know if you have any issues accessing the activities, and we'll figure that out.
You should be in week 3, day 2, and you should start. It starts with 14, so it should be the first folder you guys see on there.
You seen that one before? It should be activity number 14. What you're doing is pretty much just opening up the file and making sure that you understand what exactly is going on within this HTML file. And feel free to talk amongst yourselves if you see anything interesting and your partner might have some better insight into it.
You guys should be looking at the HTML file and discussing with your partner.
No, we did that one.
Sorry.
14 JS.
I believe we might.
So you guys have seen this one before? Okay, so it shouldn't be strange. So if you've seen it before, then you already know what's happening. So I'm going to ask one of you to come explain to me what exactly is going on, since clearly you guys have seen this before, right? Cool. Let's get a volunteer going. I love just selecting volunteers. So somebody please say what's going on the screen. You got it? Cool. What do you think is going on?
So just kind of go through all the code.
Sure, just walk me through it from that first conditional and all of that.
All right, so basically, we have a few variables assigned. I think we're gonna go through that one by one. So we're gonna first ask you what's your name. Whenever we're typing, we're gonna assign the name to username.
Cool.
And then whenever the second one is gonna pop up a window say, do you like cats? You're gonna say yes or no, and that should assign a voting to a value to a conform cats.
Right here. Yep.
And then go to the next one. You're gonna assign the message pet name. You don't have anything that's just being assigned by the program, and then the particular pet that can be assigned to the pet type, and then the age will be 5, and by default the cat is sent up to true.
Yep.
So and then because it depends on what's your answer. Like do you really like the cat or not? If you answer yes, you're gonna print pop up window print out the name, and which is messy plus and also the pet type is the tuxedo cat and also the age.
Yep.
And then if you don't like, if you say no, and then we're gonna say hey, you don't get my pet's information. And then we're gonna go to next because the default, the pet is well value is true. You're gonna pretty much just give a pop-up window saying my pet is a cat.
But after that first if-else block, does the code just stop?
Which one? They come up with a pair. So I think whenever we run one pair, you're gonna go to the next one, right?
Correct. What I'm getting at is that you guys always, as you're reading through your code, just as you mentioned, the way JavaScript works is it's going to start from the very top and walk all the way down. So exactly how he's been reading it out is how that code is going to initiate. So it's going to hit that first if-else conditional block, verify whether it's going to do that first if or the second else, and then it's going to move on to the next type. So you want to read your code all from top to bottom and understand how the execution flow is, because that's exactly how JavaScript will interpret it.
So if you copy everything underneath the first else,
Yes.
like if pet is tagged to the else or my pet is within 5 years old, and then if you paste that within the else, the bracket, the first else, would it stop displaying, say no, or?
You mean like if I did this?
I meant like everything. So
Oh, everything below.
what your name is, and after that it asks you if you like cats or not, right?
Well,
If you say yes, I do like cats, it's
Yeah, you would do exactly what you just said. You would throw everything into this else block. Because, so what you're saying is, if you like cats, do this, and then end, right? So let's save this file and see what happens. What is your name? I don't know, Bob. Okay. Do you like cats? Sure. Mises is a tuxedo cat. Is going to do that little block right here because it's already getting those variables that have already been set. And we're going to click OK. And that's it. Your code is only going to do what you tell it to do. So what you've explicitly told it is do this first block if confirm cats is true, and then there's nothing else for it to do because there's nothing outside of this else block. Did everyone get that? Cool. Any questions on this file and what's going on? Are there anything, like any terms or functions that seem strange and you might need a recap on it?
You over else versus else if.
Else versus else if? Oh, so an else if would be if there's a secondary condition that you want to check. So like in this else block right here, what's going on? It says if the pet age is equal to 5, then alerts my pet is 5 years old. If that's not the case, I want you to do an additional check and say, okay, well, is the pet age less than 5? Then do this. In both scenarios, if they're both false, I want you to now finally do what's in this else block. That's what's going on in if-else cases. So sometimes you'll find a lot of code bases that have a lot of if-else cases because those are typically used in like business logic related scenarios. So let's say you're coming to a storefront. Is this a new user? Else, is this a returning user? Else, is this a user that arrived with a promo code? Else, if blah, 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 blah. So it's just kind of creating different conditions in your code for it to execute what you want it to execute. Answer your question? Cool. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So next, we will be doing, what are we doing? An array. So we spoke very briefly about arrays. I know you guys did this last class, but just to reiterate again, you start at an index 0 when you want to access different variables. So if you wanted to access zebra, you would do zoo animals, open bracket, 0, close bracket, and then you would get access to this object right here, which is a string, and so on and so forth for rhino, giraffe, and owl. Now, if you wanted to print all of those individual objects from the tool set that you guys have right now, I would imagine that this is how you would do so. You would use a whole bunch of console logs and then print out each value of the array sequentially based on their index. But what's the problem with that? If anyone wants to take a stab. Yeah, you're repeating yourself. It's code duplication all day, every day. It looks very ugly, especially when arrays aren't always that small. You might have an array of all the users that have ever accessed your website since day one, and that could be in the thousands. And you wouldn't want to now print them all out sequentially in that fashion. So hence why we are going to be learning about, wait a second, what's this? Full instructions, blah, 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 blah. Didn't get a chance to look at this activity. Is this activity even worth doing? Let's see. Unsolved. They want you to console log out everything. That's a waste of your time. Let's continue to move on. Yeah. So what we are going to do, what's the number 16? Let's see what what's in there. Blah, blah, blah. Create an array, then modify each element, and then make them lowercase. It's also a waste of your time. Let's just jump right into for loops because that's more interesting. You don't want to do code duplication. Code duplication sucks. So that's what we said. What's wrong over here? We're writing all this code over and over again. A better way to do so would be by using a for loop, and we'll actually take a look at this piece of code right here. So that would be number 17, my first for loop. Let me explain what each individual item of this for loop does. When you are iterating through an object, you want to say start at index whatever. So in this scenario, we're saying start at index 0. Then you want to add a conditional over here that says you're not going to iterate from index 0 as long as index 0 I is less than the length of the array. Continue to iterate with everything that's inside this loop. And then you're going to increment that index by 1 through every iteration. So what we expect to see is going to do this work of console logging out for the length of this array. And the length of this array is 4 times. Questions on that? What I would like you to do is open up this file on your computers and just see what it's doing inside the console. And then play around with it. We'll do this for 5 minutes. Open up that HTML file, activate it, look at your console, and then start editing it and make sure you understand each individual item of this for loop. This would be number 17. Yep. Minutes up to 6:55.
That's a good question.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
All right. So I got asked an interesting question, and I wanted to present that to the rest of the class. So if I could get your attention real quick, I'm going to iterate. I want to talk about what's going on in this loop. I love the browser console. I go to it every day because it's the only way I'm able to stay sane at my job. So I would hope that when you're messing around with this file, you're using on the console fields that might not make sense to you immediately. So I think one new field is this .length. So we do vegetables.length. What does that actually give us? It gives us the size of the array, which would be these 4 elements. Now we know that we're able to iterate through any piece of code I put within this bracket block. Is going to iterate through that 4 times. So it's going to do console.log 4 times as it accesses each individual element in the vegetables array, because we know that I starts at 0 and then I is being incremented within the for loop case. And we're also going to make sure that we only want to iterate through it 4 times, because as long as I is less than vegetables.length, it will continue to hit it. Now, let's say you manipulate that and you say, well, let's say as long as I is greater than vegetable length, what do you expect to happen in this scenario?
I wouldn't expect anything.
Exactly. Nothing would be printed, because why is that? Yeah, I is starting at 0, so I will never be greater than the length, because it never got a chance to increment. So your code is only going to do what you tell it to do. Now, I got asked the questions to saying, well, let's say I wanted to walk through this array and find a specific value inside this array. From the tools that you have right now, how would you find like an element within this array? Or maybe I'm not saying that correctly. How would you compare elements in this array to the object, to a value you want to find inside
So,
of
for
it?
example, if you have the value P's, how could you find P's?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Index.
Index of? I guess you could use index of, but let's say you didn't have access to index of. We're doing this old school. What other things do you have in your tool set that you could use?
What are you asking again?
So let's say we want to figure out what index P's is at in this array using this for loop. How would you? Yes. How would you do that? Yeah. But how within this for loop would you return? Would you find that I value to return? Is what I'm trying to say. But you already know that. But let's say this was an array of 5,000 elements, and you just want to find where P's is. No. So what you would do is you would use a comparative value. You know that you want to find P's. So something needs to be equal to P's. What else do you have in your tool so that you can provide a conditional value into? What did you say?
So then if the vegetable, I
Yep.
equals to the piece.
Exactly. So you would use your if cases. So you would say if. Oh, whoops. There we go. There we go. Cool. So you would say if, I think it's open brackets in JavaScript, vegetables I equals peas, then you would return, or maybe we just console log it. Console log the index. That's what we care about, and we don't want to do this stuff. So we're going to iterate through this, and it's only going to print out when it finds P's. So, and actually, let's make this P's. Let's save that and see what happens. And there you go. It iterated through it. It realized on the first index, it found the P's, and the console logged it out. Yes. So that would be, yes, the second index, which is 1. Questions on that? On iterating through elements, finding elements, using what you already have to do the work that you needed to do.
Is this one of those situations where we still should use the triple equals? Because then you were saying something about.
Yeah, you could use triple equals because it's more strict. You might find yourselves in a scenario where, I don't know. So triple equals compares the type and the value inside that object. So make sure that first of all, am I comparing a string value of P's to another string value of P's? I think you can find funny scenarios where equals might be true in like
Where
what?
if you were asking for them to maybe give you a number response, kind of
Yeah.
like a letter in,
Sure.
like the word 9, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, so I think sometimes in that scenario, I think sometimes 1 can be also true in this scenario as well if you're using double equals. So you want to make sure that you're comparing integer 1 versus a string 1. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Cool.
I did some JavaScript a couple years ago, and I remember a situation where it made a big difference. But now it's been so long, I don't remember why.
Yeah, it's definitely in your best interest to use triple equals because then that allows less additional variables for you to worry about because you're comparing the type and you're comparing the value.
So that should be the default.
That should be the default. Yep. Good question though. Any other questions before we move on? Because I think the next thing would be an activity. So let's see. So we already walked through the array. Blah 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 blah. Okay, I think now we're actually going to get you to write out the array yourself. So let's open up activity 18. We'll do this for 15 minutes. It's just gonna have a series of for loops, I believe. Let's open up that file. Yeah, and just write the for loop yourself to iterate through it, just so that we're kind of like cementing the for loop logic.
Anything else having trouble finding which file on 18 Zulu unsolved.
Yeah, so there's a library for some development. So really everything. Yeah, but yeah, you can do it. Yeah, Slack me. Gives us set up. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Better write my last name almost.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I started working on second. Just like airport, you gotta take care of like his how he's doing. You don't run out of time. You kind of just see what they're doing. Very obviously in terms of that, but you can assign it to option number, you can assign it and the number types of values. Just tell it to be true or false. Tell it to be just a string of words. I want to say something.
You guys go first. Besides our
No. Converse away.
Oh, you are starting to do some.
Yeah, I'm definitely. There's also a thing about .NET. I don't know how. You start with simple zero. Please type in it's the word. What's the difference? I didn't want to know. The last one. Well, I was trying to learn.
Well, you can just do the responsiveness and take out, right? Because the Xbox won't matter.
You guys got any questions over here?
Is there a reason that they use I? Because I mean, that's just a variable. So.
Yeah, it's just a variable. You can name it whatever you want.
Yeah.
I think it's just something we all learned something we all did in school and just kind of like stuck. Yeah. Cool. Say what? I negative one? Oh, is it? Sure. Got it.
Is there, I understand now, like, we understand, like, double equal sign versus triple equal sign is more
Yes.
specific.
Yes.
Specificity to it, but I guess in bigger picture, like, more detailed in the future.
Yeah.
Is there a more applicable thing to just specificity?
So for like the reasons between doing double equals versus triple equals?
In this situation, the double equal sign would be more preferable.
Oh, I think nowadays double equals is becoming deprecated and people just prefer to do triple equal because it's more strict. Because I've definitely found scenarios where we were comparing a value that was actually an integer, but it came in as a string, and we didn't catch it early enough in our development that it caused future bugs down the line. So to prevent that type of headache, it's better to be strict. Okay.
It helps it to be it's not necessary.
Sure, it's not necessary if your code is small enough to be able to manage it. But the moment your code gets big and unwieldy, that type of stuff will become a headache. Yeah.
I did say the funny thing about that. Recently, like 5 It's pretty much not reasonable.
All right. Cool. Could everybody raise their hands if they're able to get through this activity with no issues? I want to know if we need to move on or not. All right. It looks like people are still working on it, so maybe we'll give them a couple more minutes.
Someone said that was like
All right. For those of you who have actually completed the last exercise, feel free to move on to exercise 19. And then we'll do that for 15 minutes. Then we'll have a break at 7:30 and get back into class at 7:40. Cool.
Which activities should they move on to?
19. I believe you're creating a for loop from scratch in this one. Pretty straightforward.
I am as the general part with the solution website. 19, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, no problem.
Use your browser console to tell you exactly what you need to know.
You guys got it? Yeah. Whatever value is.
Because your job is
So what is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, so. Oh, okay. Okay, so then I have that one. Oh, really? Okay, so then what do you want to constable?
Oh, I see, I see. I see.
Okay, so yeah.
So, you define ceramics and function. So when you're calling the function, it's function. So you replacing names with names.
Oh, that's fine.
Remember how to.
This is the same. The same. Replacing the same variable.
Variable coordinates that you always have access to this. That makes it very hard. How do I do that?
Try getting all of those two lines there. Yeah, that's what I'll do. On different lines. Sense. You got a pretty good grasp of this so far, Dan. You seem like you got a pretty good grasp of this so far. It's all making sense.
It's always a little bit different.
Yeah.
So we can't.
You start feeling confused right away.
So we can't.
Such as.
For me, the layout.
And that's the toughest part conceptually, because that's how he showed it. He goes forward, and then he put a conditional for to check for these. Once you start having conditions instead of keeping everything separated and independent, kind of, at least isolated, nothing in mind. That should be non-systems really help. Just sense to you. Because there's no standard practice with a lot of them. If you're raised, for example, a lot of times you use I for use reference and index, but that could be a J, whatever makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't check that at first, but then I get an error.
If you put in 0, it's going to log out.
Yeah, so yeah,
Where's the console? So your question is I had a console model actually
He told us he was not selfish.
So here we're starting twice, just straight. Explain
What is the same level?
Oh, I see what's going on. We assign
How are we gonna know?
addition. Exactly, because now you're editing the array as you're doing
We have
it. So
access
you
to.
could kind of
Do it until Alright. So now at least one is so we have well, does this consistency how the different HTML tags are being so first of all, syntax will get into so you want to say this yeah. Now we have our eyes constantly changing. These will have a certain value. Now we have a very important part of the
What happens if you add
What happens if you have one?
Feel free to take a break if you need one. We'll start class back up at 7:40.
It'll automatically return to the string.
And that is because your conditioner was
always?
it's zero because you're not going to so
So there always needs to be some kind of.
you need to have some kind of stopgap. Or your code can actually crash out.
Oh, it already has. You can see here that everything it already has. It's already there.
Oh,
So
Okay.
just
That's a good question. Let's see what happens. Yeah, back when I used to do JavaScript, it had to be condition had to be in the middle.
Well, then it's all string.
We're gonna throw that back into the file.
Cool.
Cool. So yeah, so this is the file.
Yeah, so if I just like copy this,
Why does it say again?
Oh, you can do that. Oh,
and then
because you're saying lots of laws.
Okay, but then I copied the whole, well, not the whole code, but I bet there's
Let's try and move back to
yeah.
So you're gonna be running on 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say somebody wanted the top 10 best places.
well, numbers.
You actually don't set documents.
Let's try this. Move that.
You want to stop.
That's what I did.
Right.
I am.
Probably the last one too.
But it shows my mistake.
Okay.
So it does have, it has to be at the end.
Alright, cool. There we go.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is.
Any questions over here? Cool.
You don't have a CSS.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm.
Any questions over here?
I am space. But you, yeah. Right. Just remember that's very key.
Anything to do. You want to print out a link that has what numbers.
I can still.
So look at the. So what is inside the quote?
I am.
Okay, so. Even the spaces count in the string, it's still counted as a character.
Yeah, it's in the class of notes.
Just remember that it is
Exactly what you do.
exactly what you were
Computers can think.
Makes sense.
not yet.
Not yet.
I hope not. You're all screwed.
Yeah.
What is it? What is that? Again?
Loop without using an array. Okay. Question. Looping without using an array, yeah. Just making more work for yourself. The thing about arrays is not only simply based on how much you're trying to iterate, basically. So this variable I define already, you could have iterating through that variable's like as if it has variable value. But it can be
Okay. All right, we're gonna kick class right back into gear again. Could you everyone raise their hands if they're able to solve that activity? Cool. We're just going to walk through an example really quickly of what that should typically look like. You would just have an array that has a variable of I that starts at 0. You would compare it to make sure as long as I is less than 5, that would iterate through the for loop at least 4 times. It would start from 0 to 4. You want to increment that index every single time you walk through this scope of the loop. Console log out I am. That's the only thing that's static within this example. The only thing that stays static is I am. The only thing that changes is the index. So you do I am plus I, and then you should get I am 0, I am 1, I am 2, I am 3. Questions on that? You'll notice that in this particular solution, you didn't need an array to walk through. Because don't forget, the only thing we're doing that was different in the zoo example is that we did dot length. Zoo animals dot length is still just an integer. Don't let that confuse you. You don't have to only for loop through an array. You can just provide a number of your own and then iterate through the number of times you want to iterate through it. Questions?
But obviously, that's only gonna work if we have the same thing. Right? Like the other one with the different animals and stuff like that. Obviously, we can't do that with that.
I don't understand the question.
Like, just have I am 1.
Yes. So if it wasn't numbers and it was each variable inside their array, then you would iterate through the length of the array. Yep. And still, even in that scenario, you don't have to iterate through the entire length of the array. You could just say stop at the 3rd index and call it a day. All right. So the next activity we'll be doing will be, let's see, should be activity 20. Let's pick that up. You're going to start from scratch, writing code that iterates through the following array: my farm, chickens, pigs, cows, horses, and ostriches. Not sure what ostriches are doing on this farm, but we're going to console log out each name of the animal on the farm, and then we're going to use the char at method. Do you guys know what the char at method is? This would be a great opportunity to practice your Google foo. You're going to search on Google, you're going to look at examples, and you're going to understand what char at is. I am not going to tell you. So if I'm walking around and you guys are asking me what is char at, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to watch you Google .char at, and y'all are going to tell me what it is. And check if the first letter in the animal's name begins with a C or an O. If it does, create an alert that says starts with a C or an O. All right. And we're going to do this for 30 minutes. So 8:15, we'll kick back into gear. Let's see what's next. Rock, paper, scissors. Yep.
I love that old animation. So this is a really tricky one, guys. Keep in mind that you're checking if two things are happening. So think about conditional statements, checking for two different things. Try to maybe look that up if you're not sure.
You will create a folder that creates that right there. So you want to create things. Yeah. So you can kind of like follow the same logic. You are that loop and then this same this way. Yes. It's fast.
So you have to figure out which chart is the index of the chart. The same thing you're doing with
You say
chart.
Google how to use charts for sure. Yes. The first character. Yes, it is actually. Google food and stuff. Oh, you good?
I would also be careful of mixing it in your conditional
Let me know. I'll be
using
back.
ampersands, and the and signs. You're checking the board.
Oh. Oh, you gotta check if it's a C or an O.
So you'll have to, you might have to write this.
It's not Excel.
It's like, double check, okay. Well, but it ends up printing everything.
So, okay, so that's okay. Then you might need to do this. If chart at 0 is this, or then you have to write the whole thing again. If animals at chart 0 equals.
I shouldn't have to do
Pretty much you just might have to rewrite that animal at chart 0 equals O. I don't think it's understanding if it's equal to this or that. It's saying
Oh,
if
I
it's
see.
equal to C,
Okay.
or if there's an O in general.
Right, okay, okay, I've got to do it twice.
Yeah, you gotta
I've
write
got
that
to do,
first
I've
thing
got to,
pretty much twice.
that's,
Yeah,
okay, I see what
You
you're saying.
get it now.
Okay.
Okay, because that's, it's always. Okay, so now, let's see.
Do you have the live stream?
Yeah. There's something. Thomas, get it.
No, I'm not.
As a quickly developed tools is, I think it should be sent back as man ship.
Oh.
Okay, so we got it.
I actually this is something
What we're missing now is closing this bracket. What we want to print out this. So I'll
yeah, so the last one didn't work and so the alert
Just check each index and look at that first.
yeah, that's what
Yeah, exactly. So how do you compare two things? JavaScript,
equal to
so you're checking this one.
I wasn't sure about you.
That's exactly what it is.
What's that saying is for each index is 0, 1, 2.
I would do console log maybe instead of alert. Just give it alert.
It says alert. So you're just getting a pop.
I would say do a console log because then you'll see it in console have anything better.
So the next thing you have is
Maybe do a console log.
Google what jar
The console log.
and see how you can use it as a console
Chicken
log.
is going to tell you whether or not it wants to see it on
What animal names?
So as it's going through console log, so the way we do it.
That's good to me.
Cool. We didn't talk about this stuff.
We did. Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, typically, I guess this would return also whatever, but solve first software would
This may be every single time.
I was wondering how it was so long.
To see which one's which, yeah, it's just the overall stats. I would change this. I don't have this power.
That would work, but you have to do it. Like right now, we're saying this statement or just C. It's not going to duplicate this.
So you need a
No, you would copy and paste the exact same line. Exactly. Instead of no, either this block or this block.
Very much like this.
Oh, so
right, because it doesn't make sense.
Yep.
It's just a straight.
It's just a straight.
So you could have two ifs.
So that's pretty much like a that starts with if. Think of it like that. It's going to be two conditionals to check it. It's going to check if my farm chart at 0 is 0 or my farm chart at C. Same sentence to something else.
Would it be easier from like a readability standpoint to start it on its own line?
Up to you. Well, this could just be
Right, so you could have, okay, so you can have two, like, if statements, if this
oh, this would be I'm sorry. So this would just be
So it's gonna go through and tell you. Don't have some line. And this last bit is telling you you're 7.485. So this one just moves so by 1 attack.
because what you had before was check if the chart index 0 is O or C. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't do what you want to do. You want to check again. The index is O.
and then at the end it goes still console log 1.5.
Well, assuming your code tells you to do that. Right now, your code is actually, because it's missing the scope out.
Right now, minus. So still now you said so.
So where you put the second is where you need the numbers.
So I don't need these. This one has to go.
Oh, you do? That's the 4 you need. Yeah. Now you need another squad. Cool.
Because I couldn't tell, so I was like, no, I'm just gonna put it out. That was not what I was.
This one is in or
You definitely gotta ask them about that.
So you
And so Charles. So if you did Charles, you look at the word first Yes, so you're looking for the first letter, and that's what we're looking for.
So it's saying, what is this? Where's my for my
First letter.
Inside of you, right?
So
So it needs to know what that is.
So that's returning a string.
maybe put on the other. You put that on the same one.
What it is, right? And it doesn't say my farm. It just says
Yes, it's
only, well, it only alerts you if you're If it does, then alert starts with C. So,
like how you go you're saying it starts with a C.
So what I do is do strings here.
Which is, all you want to say is starts with a C or no. So you don't want to log out like that without these instructions.
Because like if it does, then you're not learning saying it starts with C. I can just explicitly type out everything in there in a string and tells you what it is. That doesn't accomplish it. That doesn't automate this. It's just me basically saying, chicken starts.
Well, it doesn't say chicken. It just says start. There's really no instruction. Don't worry about the actual track salary now. It just wants to log out. It starts with C or no?
This line.
The first letter is C.
How would this string here know what starts with C? Because all my code is doing is saying check this, and if changes the event 0, there's an O chicken, or a C. console hits 3 times,
wipe out one.
Again, don't worry about the cracking up. Slugging it 3 times. Telling you,
it's very stupid because it's like,
But yeah, just to get you practicing. But yeah.
Okay, so with conditionals, so a conditional statement is the if else statement. So you could, there's 2 ways to do it. One is basically it's 2 yeah, so this isn't an actual conditional statement. It's an if possible. So it's not gonna, you don't want to console log and then have it check console log. You want it to all happen in the background basically. So the way you want to do it is have it loop through, like you can go through all the different conditional statement after this conditional
Also, I have like I think like one game. I don't know where it is. Those are like meaning of originally before start this I have like now I like 20 sorry
Are you sure it's
within this case, each one you get to for so starting with letter 0.
oh, it's a couple of
If so this condition is like and then you condition so now everything that's in there, so have only so you want to move this And so now, every time we start at 0, possible letter 0, so you letter 0, number 0 says and one, check both.
Either or, so this would just be a definite,
Yeah, you could do it. So it's like if you weren't checking out C or O, you're going to C or not, then
Like, because again, my theory was actual last is the second one.
if statement is true, do this. Else, if that one wasn't true, do this. And then both two separate things. Exactly. Check the first one. If that doesn't work, check the second one. If both of those fail, then if it's like if it's always if true, unless you're really saying if false. Like you could tell it if this is false, then it was
How did they want to do that? Because I didn't know. Or else, so I didn't know. I said my chat for the first letter is a result variable. And it gives here, so okay, C, shall it be so. One comes with large stuff. You know, no one's yeah, so I'm basically going through and saying, oh, are you a C or no, you neither then say you're not C or no.
So if you wanted to do it in one line, basically, of
I would just say, or I would say equal or.
yeah, you could do if you try that C, double pipe bomb, or if or letter try that 0,
Okay,
O, but that's a catch-all. Yours is that.
Oh, I need to set a secondary. Okay. Yeah, yes, I can.
All right, we are going to move on to our final exercise. We're going to actually use the rest of class time to finish off the next exercise. So if I could get everybody's attention, raise your hand if you're able to actually resolve that exercise. All right, cool. We're going to look at a quick solution of what that looks like. So what it would be let's see. We have an array called farms. We're getting the length of farms, so now we have an array length. We're going to iterate from an index of 0. We're using j this time. Don't feel like you always have to use I. I is just a variable name. You can name that whatever you feel like naming it. So now we're going to use j. J equals 0. We're going to iterate through the length of the array, which would be 5. And then we're going to console log out each individual animal and then check for that specific animal in that execution flow. Verify that the character at index 0, the very first letter in these values over here, is equal to C, or we're going to do the very same thing again and check if it's equal to O. This or, you don't have to use or. This could easily be another if conditional that verifies what O is. And then we're just going to alert and call it a day. Questions?
If you want to edit it, so it would look through every single letter of that in the array.
It wouldn't.
Would come up 2 times. How would you edit that?
If chicken came up twice?
Or it would be like the first C and then the fourth C. So you get 2 of those.
So this is only going to check the very first letters.
Exactly.
So if you want to check like additional sections in that value, you would just use a different index number. You would do 3 or you would do 4. Or unless you want to iterate through the entire string, is that what you're talking about?
So just if there was like 100 different animals.
Yeah. So I think you can do, what can you do? You could probably do something like this. You do another for loop. Let's do I equals 0. You could do I less than var animal equals my farm j. Iterate through the length of that string. I plus plus. So now we're going to iterate through the length of the string at hand. So that for chickens it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then for pigs it would be 4 times, and then we iterate through each letter. And I think actually I'm doing this wrong. This might actually be split. I think that's what splits the letter into an array. And then, yeah? Okay. So then you could just do console log, I don't know, animal dot char at I. And that would go through each character in the animal. Yeah, so you could probably do like an if case over here and then check for all the C's or something like that. Yep, so that's how that would work. So if we open that up in our browser, let's see what that looks like. And you'll see that we're going through chickens, we'll print through every chicken, pigs, we'll go through every letter in the pigs, cows, so on and so forth. So by doing this, you realize that for loops are very powerful because we're using two for loops nested within each other to do very different actions. The very first action is we're looping through the original list of animals, and the second action, we're looping through every single letter in each individual animal. So you have additional tools in your toolbox to solve bigger problems now. So questions on this solution?
Be really careful nesting loops in the loops, though. That's something that can get really out of hand quickly.
Yeah.
Just be very careful about where your open braces are and where they close, etc. Really,
yep.
Really indenting needs to be perfect.
The general rule of thumb I like to go by is if you ever find yourself in a scenario where you need to do a triple nested for loop, you might want to rethink what it is you're trying to solve. Because there really shouldn't be a need for a triple nested for loop. Or maybe there is. I've never found one. So moving on, we are going to talk a little bit about rock, paper, scissors. And this is going to be the next activity that we work on for this class. But But before we do that, let me just show you what that looks like. So, first of all, does everyone know what rock, paper, scissors is? I don't want to assume everyone knows this game. Raise your hands if you know what this game is. Okay. Someone, you good? All right. So, uh-oh. So with rock, paper, scissors, what we want to do is we're going to use browser actions to play the game against ourselves. So we're going to press R for rock, P for paper, S for scissors. So I'm going to hit R, and the computer chose S. And then that's going to say, well, I won, there's no losses, and there's no ties. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to choose paper this time around. I won again. I'm going to hit paper again. Now I've lost because paper does not win against scissors, and now I have one loss. What just happened? How did the computer choose an element? How do you think it chose an element? Random. So keep that in mind for what functions you're going to be using on the back end. You know you need some way to randomly choose an element, which is scissors. You could think of that. You could think of those elements as elements in an array. You could randomly choose an index between 0 to 2 to access rock, paper, scissors for the computer. So these are the type of things you want to think about when you're solving a problem. What did you just see? You know you need a way to get the letter that I'm clicking on my keyboard. You know you need a way to randomly select rock, paper, scissors. And then you need a way, actually what's the third bit? What's the third bit of this? You need to be able to write to the screen, but what else? You need to keep you need to tally the wins, losses, and ties. And that's all going to be elements that you're saving on the back end. So those could easily be variables that are just incremented with each round. But first, let's figure out how we actually get that event from my keyboard. So you guys should open up a file called 21 events. And within events, you're going to see a brand new function called document.keyUp. What document.keyUp does, and actually let's start from the beginning. The very first thing in this code you're going to see is variable user text is a document get element by user text. What does that do? What is happening in this line over here? Say what? Exactly. And where is that element? It's in the HTML, which is your document. So we're expecting that somewhere in this piece of code, something has an ID called user text, and that would be this span over here. So we're going to grab that element. That's now going to be assigned to user var, and let's actually do that in our console because you want to see step by step how this stuff works. Actually, let me just open this up in the browser. So if we do document.getElement by user text, we're going to see that we have now received the span on the back end. We're going to assign that to a variable x. So now x is equal to span. The next thing you're going to do is each element in HTML has some fields that are common across each other. So there's a field called text content, and what that will do will give you everything that is that's in the middle of the span block. So between these, it used to be inner HTML, but that's no longer convention. They're using text content. Yeah, so inner HTML is technically old school now. So text content will give you anything within this span block that's a text. And I'm assuming that should be just this. ... nothing. Let's see what happens. ... nothing. So now we know that we're going to always receive the string that's within the span block. What we're doing over here is the next part of this exercise is document on key up triggers an event that says listening out for a key up event from my keyboard. Keep in mind this is not a key press event. Two different things. So when I hit G on my keyboard, nothing has changed. It's only when I release G then you see it's fired an event. There's two separate events over here. There's key up and there's key press. And you can use them for whatever you feel like doing in your code. But for today, we're doing key up. So as soon as a user has pressed the letter on the key and released it, then we're going to trigger this function over here. And the scope of this function says, when this event is triggered, grab that variable, user text, which we now know is a span, take everything within the text content and replace it by the key that was pressed within the event. That's what we saw on the screen. So when I pressed R, I'm going to trigger another event. It's going to hit this block. And actually, let's actually do this step by step. Let's look at that code. Breakpoint. So now I'm going to hit T. And now my code has triggered this event. It stopped over here and saying, okay, I need to do this very next line. Right now I have access to an object called event. And within event, it says the code is key T, because that's the letter I just pressed. The dot key is actually T, the letter itself. And that's how I know that if I do event.key, I'll get access to the keyboard letter that I press. This is why your developer tools is really powerful, because it gives you all the information you need to get the job done. If I would never have known that event.key actually kept T unless I went into the code and verified what exactly is events, what exactly do I have access to within events, and so on and so forth. Have you guys gone over debugging? You guys really need to go over debugging. But yeah, I can't actually think of a scenario of how I would have figured that out if I didn't know how to debug. But maybe that's a good exercise. Let's walk through that. If I didn't know how to debug, what would I do? What would I do? What would you do? Because you don't know how to debug. So what are you going to do? Right? Console log. Exactly. So we're going to console log events. And let's see what happens. Let's restart this page. We're going to hit R. Whoops. Hit R over here. Release it. Now we know we have a keyboard event. Let's walk through that. That keyboard event is event. It's going to tell you all the keys, all the values that are available to you to solve whatever it is you're trying to solve. So we know that event.key is R. The key code is 82. What else? Was a shift key pressed? Was a return value pressed? I don't know. We only really care about key. So console log, console log, console log until they teach you how to debug. So any questions on this small snippet of code? I'm going to give you all like 3 minutes just to walk through it yourselves on your own computers. Make sure you understand what's going on. Ask us questions, because this is going to be very integral in the very next activity, which we'll do until 9:20. So yeah, pick this up. Play around with it in your console. Make sure you understand what on key up is doing. Was there a bigger question on the end about what we just walked through? No? All right. Just make sure everyone's getting it. Hey guys, just want to re-explain what we just talked about again, because I don't think I did a good job about that. This section of code what you're doing is you're creating an event listener. I didn't say that before, but that's a very important term to understand. An event listener is something that you're saying, listen, you're telling your code, listen for this particular event and always do this piece of code over and over again every single time this event is triggered. So your code is always going to be listening for this specific event, and that specific event is on key up. This is a built-in event on your browser. You can create your own events later on in time, but by default, every browser comes with an on key up event. And that's why we're saying document for this HTML document, listen for an on key up event, and on an on key up event, always do this piece of code over here. You're registering this event on your browser. That's what's happening.
So now you're using the word event to describe something that's happening, but you're using function event parentheses. So
Yes.
what is that word event doing? What is
This is passing in an event object during that specific event.
My question is, did you just create that? Could you just call it function?
Oh yeah, you could call this like, I don't know, test.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah, and that could be.
Inventing that. You're just making a.
So it's almost like that function is taking the event that just happened and passing it into a block of code where you have access to it. So now you can have access to like key because the keyboard event got passed in. That's what's happening. They name an event for like clarity, you know.
Right. So you could call it event 1, for example.
Sure, and because you know this is a keyboard event, it might make more sense if you said keyboard event.
There you go. That's okay.
Yeah. And now that might be the better way to do things. Because if we refresh the page, you'll see that doesn't break things. It just makes your code easier to understand. Did everyone get that? Don't get caught up with why certain variables are named certain ways, because a variable could be named anything. It's really at your own discretion. What you feel makes sense for you and how your code might be easier understood by someone else. Cool. So yeah, let's do this for another 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to the actual activity.
Because everything is light up in blue, it doesn't say which. Okay, the stuff in orange and the stuff in green.
never going to be a certain color that is going to be made up. You're going to have to learn that. What certain words, where things are like lots of function. Okay, usually with dot and a word after, change say like document dot on show. Document dot get. Okay, but then you can change.
All right, let's move on to the actual activity because this is a big one. All right. So let's see. Pseudocode. You guys can do that while doing the activity. Blah blah blah. We'll be there to help you along the way. Great. So you guys want to pull up activity 23, and you're going to do this in groups of 4. It looks like you're already kind of sitting in groups of 4, but if you are not in a group of 4, just move around, make friends, find a partner, because you're going to want to define the individual pieces of this game that we saw earlier. You want to be able to pseudocode exactly what you see in the game, which is you need to be able to present to the user instructions. Press one of these 3 elements to start playing. When a user presses one of those buttons, something happens. We now print out a bunch of new text, and we're saying you chose that letter. So on key up, I had a value of R. I'm now saving that to a text content of a variable or HTML element over here. Then I have another HTML element called computer chose, and I'm just throwing in the value that the computer chose randomly. And then I'm just saving the tally of the wins, the losses, and the ties on the back end. So discuss amongst yourselves in your groups the different elements that you need to build this code. And I believe, do the instructions tell you how to choose things randomly? You might need to Google how to get a random index in an array and see what results come back to you. Or maybe let me double check. The code might actually give you something. Let's see. Oh yeah, it does. Okay, so the boilerplate code, which should be RPS2, comes with a math function that gives you the computer guess. So you don't have to worry about that. So yeah. Well, actually, you might be better served looking at the boilerplate that we just gave you and understanding what's going on here first before you make any changes. So yeah, we'll do this till class ends. Which code? This? You should have this code. This is an activity. If you guys don't have this code, let us know. We'll get it to you. Question.
Well, this don't solve. I was like, the game flows and I did this class. I have no solves.
Yes, because you're supposed to be that kid.
Oh, okay.
You're creating
No,
this.
no, I just thought you. No, but sometimes, sometimes they show up.
I think after class they show.
No, he always says.
Really?
Yeah, he always says, don't look.
Oh, he says he says don't look.
I took it. Yeah, I took it away. Yeah.
You take the solutions away.
I took it away.
Yeah.
Where are the rocks? Rocks. Rocks.
Oh, Chris, I'm going to stop the live stream because I'm not saying much after this.
Okay.
Cool.